Today we're going to have a little chat about a situation, and in reality, we're not going to focus as much on the situation because I honestly don't know a lot about it. I'm using it just as an example of what I want to talk about. That used to be something I used to do in the old days. I would take something that was happening on social media, celebrities, whatever, and use it just so I could springboard into the topic that I wanted to talk about. In this case, we're talking about, I believe, is Jake Doolittle and Ethan Klein. Before I even start, I don't watch Ethan Klein. I don't know much about him. I definitely don't have a clue who Jake Doolittle is. And from now on, I'm just going to say Doolittle because I do remember that part because of the movie. But I honestly don't know who he is. I did glance at his account. But because I'm trying to teach the algorithm not to give me drama and it looks like he does commentary, I decided not to actually watch videos of his. I'm assuming by the titles and the thumbnails that he does commentary. And we all know Ethan Klein is half of H3H3 and he does a little bit of, well, commentary, I guess I should call it. Anyway, the bottom line is that this person, Doolittle, apparently did a video where he called out Ethan Klein for, I'm assuming, faking an illness. Now, what little I know about this story is because yesterday I landed on Adam McIntyre's video about a reaction of Ethan Klein watching a video from Doolittle and Adam was reacting to it, okay? So what little information I could gather, and then again, it might be misinterpreted by me, but if I understood correctly, at one point Adam explained that Doolittle took the test results from Ethan Klein and took him to a doctor so that the doctor could tell him what was wrong with Ethan. And two things I want to say about that doctor. If that is true, first of all, that doctor should be in jail because, not necessarily in jail, but he should lose his license because, first of all, you're not supposed to diagnose somebody that you're not taking care of. And number two, and more importantly, if you have test results, they have the name of the patient. So how are you going to explain to somebody that's not the name on the test what's happening to that person? That's illegal. Both things are illegal, basically. So, yeah, now. Anyway, apparently, for what I could gather, this Doolittle person made a video where he put into question Ethan Klein's diagnosis. Then Ethan went ahead and defended himself by letting people know exactly who this Doolittle character was. And then after a little while, Doolittle came and apologized. But the way, at least the part that I saw, people were a little confused as to whether or not he was really apologizing to Ethan. It felt more like he was apologizing to his own audience. And apparently this guy has done some fundraisers for people who have chronic illness, which is the reason why I guess he felt the need to apologize for his behavior. The reason why I'm calling this situation into your attention is not because I care about Ethan. Well, you know, he's a human. Of course I care. But what I mean is he's not like, I'm not a fan, so I don't, that's over there. And I really don't know Doolittle, so I don't know if he's a nice guy or not. I have a big problem with people gatekeeping illness. There's a big difference between you criticizing or calling attention to somebody doing something. For example, every time one of these girl world commentary channels say something to the effect of the health effects of what one of them is eating, I can understand that. I don't really like that kind of content, so I stay away from it. But if somebody comes and says, well, you know, she's eating a lot of fatty foods and that's not good if she has X, Y, or Z condition, I can understand that. I can even understand when you tell somebody that some of the, if you find out that a particular creator has some sort of ailment and you decide to explain to your audience what that ailment is like based on what you're reading and whatnot, I can even understand that. But there's one thing that I will never understand and will never agree with, and it's somebody telling somebody else what is and isn't their illness. For the purposes of this video, I am going to give you a little bit of an explanation of what IBS is. And I'm not going to go into the specifics, but I'm going to tell you enough so that you understand why I feel so strongly about this. Now, I'm diagnosed with IBS. When I first heard about IBS, my mother had it. She was diagnosed over 30 years ago, okay? Back then, it was IBS, period. And you'll find out why I mean by that in a second. But basically, my mother would not leave the house before 11 a.m. on any particular morning. And if she did, she wouldn't eat anything in the hopes that she wouldn't have to run to the bathroom. Nowadays, IBS is divided into 3 categories, which IBS-C, C stands for, IBS stands for irritable bowel syndrome. And IBS-C stands for constipation, IBS-D stands for diarrhea, and then IBS-M stands for mix. Back in the old days, we all had mix. And in fact, I have talked to many people, mostly on the D side, that have both, because of course, after you spend 10 days in the bathroom, going to the bathroom 6 or 7 times a day, you're not going to go to the bathroom for a couple days. It is what it is. So, the bottom line is this. Interestingly enough, when it comes to IBS, there is not one specific test that you can take to find out if you have it. They have to do an accumulation of tests and your medical history and whatnot to determine if you have it or not. And people tend to get very different symptoms and very different reactions to things. For example, I can eat all the ice cream I want. I have no problem with dairy products. I eat cheese. I eat yogurt. I eat most ice cream and whatnot. I don't have a problem with that. I know people that they look at a glass of milk and they end up in the bathroom. I know people that have gluten sensitivity and cannot eat bread even though they were raised in it. And so, depending on the day, and ironically, I recently had to drink antibiotics, and for those days, I was able to eat all the bread I wanted, so I was really happy about that, and didn't have a reaction. But commonly, I cannot handle bread. There are people that have meat sensitivities. They cannot eat certain meats. They turn into pescatarians because they can handle fish, but they cannot handle any meat of any animal that walks or flies on the earth. Excuse me. There are some people that I know that cannot have chocolate or coffee. Those things absolutely mess with their stomach royally. Here's the thing. If I meet somebody that has the condition, claims to have the condition, and cannot eat dairy products, I cannot just say, well, you don't have IBS because I can eat dairy products. See where I'm going with this? That's my issue. The gatekeeping. Now, I've been dealing with gatekeeping since this whole thing started because, ironically enough, because my sensitivity comes with gluten, that adds a bunch of other symptoms to this whole thing. When you're sensitive to gluten, you tend to have joint pain, bones hurt. You get a lot of brain fog. There's a lot of symptoms. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but the bottom line is that there are symptoms that mimic other things like fibromyalgia, for example. And so I spent 3 years trying to test everything I could get under the sun because we were trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And it's funny because those same years I was beginning perimenopause, and it turns out that menopause has some of those symptoms as well. So it could be menopause, it could be the gluten deficiency, or it could be that I have something that they haven't figured out yet. I stopped testing because I ran out of money and I have insurance. But right now, if I go and get tested for some things, it's going to have to come out of pocket because of the type of insurance I have. I can't afford that. So I had to stop testing. But one of the symptoms is depression. And it stands to reason. If you spend 3 days going to the bathroom 5, 6, 7 times a day, you really don't want to go anywhere. You don't want to do anything. You feel like crap. Your brain is mess. It does tend to get very depressing. And so depression is not surprising for me. It's also not an uncommon thing in my life since I was 13. And so when somebody goes on social media and claims that I am faking my depression because I'm making videos or because I'm high functioning even though I know I have a severe depression, it drives me nuts. Here's the difference. I have stood on this in front of this camera. I have stood in many places and said that mental health is not an excuse for bad behavior. And I firmly believe that. And I'm not talking about somebody that has a personality disorder and is prone to violence. I am talking about people that have depression, anxiety, BPD, bipolar, and will excuse, for example, using racist slurs because of their medical condition. That's not going to fly with me. Same with when you have a disease like I have, you do get frustrated. Believe me, I get frustrated for many reasons. I have yet to call somebody an ableist slur because I'm upset because of this. In fact, I have gotten upset over a lot of things, and I've never thought, ooh, this is the great time to use the N-word. I don't know where people think that that's something that happens. So when I heard that this kid, Doolittle, was trying to gatekeep because according to him, he's done a lot of fundraisers and he's read hundreds of people who have symptoms for X or Y disease, and they didn't think that Ethan had whatever it was. Listen, even with, like I said before, even people who have the same disease might have different symptoms. And it's not that they don't have all the symptoms. It's sometimes it's as simple as you might have the symptoms, but they're overshadowed by these other symptoms that are the most prevalent in your case. And yes, I keep biting my lip. That's why I'm jumping. And when you think about it, somebody else might have the same exact situation and have some symptoms that are more prevalent in them. Okay? That's why it bothers me so much. Now, as far as the chronic ailments that we're discussing in this situation, there's this added situation where men don't get diagnosed for certain things as much as women. I want to say that the disease in question is lupus, but I'm not really sure. Here's an added twist. Diseases like IBS, Alzheimer's, fibromyalgia, lupus, multiple sclerosis don't get as much money as cancer and diabetes do. And if you look at the screen right now, you'll realize why. Now, I realize that I got paragraphs of information. This is why I'm letting them stay on the screen longer. The reality is that the diseases I mentioned first, like lupus and all those other diseases, are predominant in women. Cancer and diabetes are predominant in men, which makes it a lot harder for companies, I guess, to spend money on them. Which is kind of funny because when you think about it, Alzheimer's is beginning to get prominence now because of who's getting Alzheimer's. I remember the switch happened a little while after one Ronald Reagan was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I started seeing fundraisers and a lot more information coming out about Alzheimer's after he was diagnosed. Donald Trump's father passed away from complications of Alzheimer's. A lot more prominent men are being diagnosed with Alzheimer's now, which makes, and dementia in general, which makes it interesting when you start seeing how much money is now going into Alzheimer's research. In case you didn't know, Robin Williams was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, which might explain why he ended up going out the way he did. There are a lot of diseases that don't get a lot of money just because women get them. And before you tell me, oh, here we go with the discrimination, let's talk about discrimination in the medical field for a second. Now, let's start with the fact that it is proven that women were diagnosed with something called hysteria more often than men, which made it really hard for women, and it still does to this day, to be taken seriously when they go to a doctor. It is what it is. Also, take into account that African Americans are believed less and are treated as if they can tolerate more pain than white Americans. Last but not least, there is a little chart from the Pew Research Center, I should say, that's talking about Hispanics. And that particular chart, almost at the bottom, tells you that doctors will not give Latinos more advanced treatment when they have certain diseases. These are patterns of behavior that are ingrained in the medical facility, and I don't know if you remember, but there was a time when all over social media people were actually showing textbooks from medical schools stating that these were facts, when in reality they're not. And the problem with that is that when you have a woman who happens to be Latino and happens to have symptoms of a disease, the doctors will just, I've told many people, I was never told that gluten sensitivity might become an issue. Or for that matter, dairy or meat or anything. I was told I could eat whatever I wanted. That's obviously not true. And that can change through time. I might be sensitive to gluten right now, but I might have been sensitive to meat at one point, because I remember for a very long time before I had the gallbladder surgery, I couldn't eat chicken without ending up in the bathroom for 2 days. And that's one of those things where you sit there and you go, we already have all these stigmas associated with all these diseases. We have all this money that is not being used for research on all these diseases because women are predominantly diagnosed with these diseases more than men. We have people who seem to think it's okay to gatekeep what you have because they don't have the same symptoms you do. This whole soup of ridiculousness creates situations like the one we're seeing between these two people. And the bottom line is, and I know I keep using that bottom line, is that Doolittle doesn't know what Ethan Klein is going through. And in fact, one of the things that he said about Ethan Klein was something to the effect of his anxiety around his health, which is, and I don't remember the exact term he used, but it was something anxiety, health anxiety or medical anxiety or something like that, which is associated with hypochondria, which is associated with hysteria, which is associated with women. I just want to bring up a little something after everything I just told you. It's a little aside from the conversation, but I always think it's interesting that we, and I speak for my part as a Latino, we tend to think of the racial disparities and how much they discriminate against blacks, against Latinos, based on ridiculous ideas that we can withstand pain more than anybody can. And I think it's funny because I don't think white people realize that this also impacts them. Because if we have a higher tolerance for pain and African Americans have a higher tolerance for pain, then by definition that means that whoever came up with these concepts thinks that white people are weak. Think about it for a second. They think you're weak. They think you cannot handle pain. And when you see the history of the United States, it kind of makes sense, because didn't the whole thing about bringing slaves to America was because the slaves were supposed to build things? Because I guess they didn't trust white people to build things because they're lazy and weak? Because that's basically what you're saying. You're insinuating that white people cannot handle things like Latinos and black people can. And to me, that sounds like you're discriminating against white people because they're weak. But I digress. Anyway, I just thought that was funny and I had to bring it up. But let's go back to the whole situation with these two characters and the concept of gatekeeping medical ailments. I personally have lived through this, and I can tell you that dismissing somebody's ailment, whether real or imagined according to you, is not only disrespectful, it's just ignorant on your part. Because once again, I remind you that not everybody's going to have the same symptoms for the exact same things. I just thought about this with bipolar. Adam Ant was a very famous singer in the 80s, and I think it was either in the 90s or the early 2000s that he came out and explained that he was bipolar and how that had impacted him. And because he had such big highs, he would take advantage of those highs to tour all over the world, to do all kinds of things, because at that point he had all that energy. And he even said back in those days, it felt like the highs lasted longer than the lows, which meant that I was touring. Then when I dropped, I just dropped. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. And I found that very interesting, because I know a couple of people with bipolar that are the other way around. Their lows are so long. I bet if they saw that interview, they would have been jealous of him, because their lows are so low that they literally spend years on the lows. Now, some people respond very well to medication. Some people do not. Personally, I don't respond well to medication, because if you've been in this channel long enough, you know that I have the bad habit of landing on that 5% that has all the side effects, all the bad side effects of every medication I've ever tried. So I tend to stay away from medications stronger than Tylenol and Advil. And God only knows what that's going to do to me later, but I tend to stay away from all of them for the most part. That doesn't mean that somebody else might not respond well to medication. The number one medication for IBS and other stomach, because I have like 3 stomach ailments: GERD, Barrett's esophagus, and IBS. One of the 3. I want to say it's the IBS. They gave me the little purple pill. I'm not going to name the pill. And I can tell you that every time that I see the clinical version name, it has the ending sounds like an Italian word. And every time I see that on a medication, I beg people not to take it, because it's been associated with memory loss and brain fog. And so the daughter of somebody that passed away from complications from dementia, aka Alzheimer's in my mom's case, I don't want to have a medication that might make that come faster. Sorry, not happening. So, and that's not counting that I actually lived through it. I went through a period where I couldn't even remember my own name and my own social security number or my birthday, even though my birthday lands on my favorite number. And when I saw that happening, I went straight to the doctor and said, "You need to take me off of these." Because I know it was the medication. So, yeah. There are a lot of reasons why. I remember a long, long time ago, I want to say it was the 80s and the 90s. Don't ask me if it was 60 Minutes, 2020, 48 Hours, one of those shows made an entire show on people faking illness for insurance purposes. And yes, there were some cases where they were. But I can't tell you how many people have been diagnosed completely disabled for not necessarily mental health issues, but things similar to what I have. And people see them walking every morning, or they see them exercising or whatever, and they say, they're faking disability. No, they're not. First of all, you can get completely disabled disability for mental health issues. Mental health don't affect your ability to move around or exercise. And in fact, exercise is very much recommended for people with mental health issues, okay? People like me with IBS, I have days that I cannot get out of bed, and then I have days that I want to walk 5 miles. Guess what? On the days that I want to walk 5 miles, I am going to walk 5 miles, because if not, I'm going to keep gaining weight. And another thing in the case of IBS, the fact that you have IBS has nothing to do with your weight. So for the ignorant people who say, "Oh, well, if you spend all day in the bathroom, then it must be really easy for you to lose weight." No, it don't. Don't ask me what it is. I can't tell you if it's because all the nutrients that are lost are the ones that can help you. I don't know how that works, but the bottom line is I don't get rid of weight. And I have actually tested the theory. I have been through a flare-up where I've been 6 days that I have not left the house because I keep going to the bathroom. And then on the 7th day, I will go to the supermarket, and they have one of those scales that are like industrial scales, and I'll stand on that scale and I will weigh the exact same amount I weighed before I started the flare-up. I can't tell you. I wish. I mean, let's be real. I've had this long enough that at this point I would have disappeared, because I would have pretty much gotten rid of all my weight. But that's not how this works. And the fact that other people, it does let them get rid of the weight. I don't know any, but apparently they do. Doesn't mean that I'm faking or that they're faking. That's the message for today. Please stop telling people that you feel that because they've been diagnosed with XYZ disease and they've read all the books. And listen, Facebook and Twitter doctors are not a real thing. You are not a doctor, and even if you were a doctor, unless you are the doctor of the person that you're speaking about, you, and by the way, if you speak about them, that's illegal. They can bust you for that. Unless you have their permission, clearly. You have to understand that there is no basis for you to tell somebody whether or not their illness is real or fabricated. You can think it all day long if you want to. But once you put on the computer, turn on the computer or your camera, and you start talking and you say it, and it comes out of your mouth and other people hear it, that's where the problem starts. Because in truth, you have no right to tell somebody else how their disease manifests. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.